You tell yourself you're introverted, that you just get tired around people, that small talk drains you, that you prefer being alone. But sometimes that explanation doesn't fully fit, because it's not just exhaustion, it's vigilance. You walk into a room and immediately start measuring yourself through other people's eyes. You rehearse sentences before speaking. You study reactions while pretending to listen. And even after a normal interaction, your body feels like it survived something dangerous. Visual, person sitting quietly in a crowded train. So maybe the real question isn't whether you dislike people. Maybe the question is, why does being perceived feel unsafe? And that answer usually begins much earlier than you think. Most socially guarded people don't look guarded. They look polite, self-aware, easygoing, sometimes even confident. But internally, social interaction feels less like connection and more like management. You manage your tone, your timing, your facial expressions, how long you hold eye contact, how quickly you reply to messages. You become hyper-aware of tiny social signals most people barely notice. A pause in someone's voice, a delayed response, a shift in energy. And your brain treats these tiny moments like important data. Not because you're dramatic, because somewhere along the way, your nervous system learned that social mistakes have consequences. Visual, slow-moving light patterns. Maybe you grew up around criticism or emotional unpredictability. Maybe love felt connected to performance, being good, being agreeable, being emotionally convenient. In behavioral psychology, this creates something called threat association. The brain starts linking social exposure with emotional risk, not physical danger, identity danger, rejection, embarrassment, disapproval. And once the brain forms that link, it stops asking, do I want connection? It starts asking, how do I avoid emotional injury? That changes everything, because now socializing is no longer spontaneous. It becomes strategic. And the strange part is, you may still deeply crave closeness while avoiding the very conditions that create it. That contradiction confuses people, including you. Visual, empty room with the sunlight. You can want connection and still fear visibility. Those are not opposites. In attachment psychology, humans are wired for belonging. But if belonging once required self-monitoring, emotional suppression, or constant adaptation, the brain learns an exhausting equation: connection equals caution. So you become skilled at being socially acceptable, not socially free. There's a difference. Social freedom feels natural. Social guarding feels calculated. One comes from safety. The other comes from prediction. You try to predict reactions before they happen. You become emotionally early, always arriving mentally before the moment arrives physically. And over time, this creates something subtle but painful. You stop experiencing people directly. You experience your interpretation of yourself around people. Visual, abstract brain animation. Neuroscience explains this through something called predictive processing. Your brain is constantly trying to anticipate outcomes before they happen. It builds internal models based on past experiences. If previous social experiences carried shame, criticism, exclusion, or emotional instability, the brain updates its prediction system. Now it expects tension before interaction even begins, like carrying an invisible smoke alarm that reacts to burnt toast as if the house is on fire. That's why your exhaustion feels real, because your nervous system isn't simply socializing, it's scanning, monitoring, calculating. And this consumes cognitive energy, especially in the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for self-monitoring and decision-making. The more self-aware you become in social settings, the less mentally present you become. Visual, waves moving slowly. Imagine your attention like a flashlight. Most people point it outward during conversation, toward the interaction itself. But socially guarded people split the flashlight in half. One half watches the conversation, the other half watches themselves inside the conversation. How am I coming across? Did that sound weird? Am I talking too much? That constant internal surveillance creates fatigue, not because you're weak, because divided attention drains the brain, and eventually solitude begins to feel less like loneliness and more like relief. But here's the deeper problem. Relief can quietly become avoidance. And avoidance teaches the brain the wrong lesson. Every time you escape social discomfort, the nervous system assumes, good choice. That situation must have been dangerous. This is how social guarding slowly reinforces itself, not through one dramatic event, but through repetition, tiny withdrawals, tiny self-protections, tiny moments where your brain chooses safety over exposure. Until eventually,